Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be finishing up our look at the original Union miniseries with Union number 4. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in March of 1994, we can see here that Omen is pictured front and center, once again with the green Justice Stone and Justice Staff instead of the blue. However, we're going to start to get a bit of an explanation about all of that within the pages of this book, but we'll get into that in a moment. I would like to say, I think this cover is fantastic. Not as good as the cover of issue number 1, which I admittedly do hold as one of my favorite comic book covers of all time, which I know probably sounds silly to some of you watching, considering that, Union wasn't exactly the most long-running series or even close to the most well-known series of the early Image books. But I honestly feel that strongly about the cover of issue number 1. It looks amazing, and I've always loved it. And, despite the fact that I don't believe this cover is as good as that, it's definitely trying its hardest, that's for sure. Mike Heisler, co-creator and story. Jim Lee, co-creator. Mark Texiera, art. Matt Broom, Tom McWilliamy, pinup. Joe Chiodo, colors. Wendy Fouts, Paige King, Monica Benet, color assist. Bill Oakley, letters. Ollie Optics, color separators. Chris Milos, Dennis Heisler, production. Bill Kaplan, editor. We see here that this issue picks up exactly where issue 3 left off, as Omen is now confronted in the kitchen of Jill Monroe by his former lover, Elia, I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to say it, and another man from his homeworld of Aegina, and he's stunned that anyone from his homeworld is now here on Earth, much less two people not two, but at least one person that he had a really close relationship with, and is so flabbergasted that he doesn't say a single word, to the point where Elia says, aren't you going to say anything? This apparently snaps Omen out of it as he steps forward to embrace Elia and states, oh my gosh, it's been so long. How did you get here? But she puts up her hands to stop him and states that they can discuss personal matters between the two of them at a later time, as well as his apparent rise in rank. Now, this is in reference to the changed color of his Justice Stone, which is now blue. And this is also our first clue as to what the meaning behind the color of the Justice Stones actually is. She then states that they don't have a lot of time for formalities or any kind of reunions, as they need to hurry if they want to get back to their homeworld. She then introduces her new relayer, the man who replaced Omen by her side, as Macon. He simply just says relayer as a greeting to Omen. Omen then sits down and starts to try and get his head around the whole situation, asking, how on earth they were able to get here. Did they use the Astral Gate? Jill also questions what the Astral Gate even is. She's completely lost in this conversation, which is understandable. They're talking about a bunch of alien technology that she has no familiarity with. At this point, Elia starts to explain that after Omen disappeared, she and her squadron captured a squad of Directorate soldiers and were able to interrogate them and find out that they had been using an astral gate to teleport back and forth from Aegina to Earth. After they realized that they were giving up a little too much information, they only agreed to cooperate if they were given full immunity in whatever court proceedings might be awaiting them in the future. She then states that when those men disclosed the location of the Astral Gate, she and her squadron led a raid on the gate and captured the soldiers who were guarding it, who also gave up almost immediately. This is because they somehow lost contact with the forces of Earth and also the Aegean monarchy, who are the leaders of the Directorate. After that happened, the Protectorate essentially won the war and is now in full control of Aegina. And because of that, Elia's squad was given permission to use the Astral Gate to go to Earth and search for Omen. So they were pushed through the gate, started looking for him. However, they have a finite amount of time to do this, and the gate is going to close at a very precise time, whether they've made it back through or not. And Elia doesn't want to be trapped here on Earth indefinitely, and states that she and the new relayer, Maycone, and Omen need to get back to the gate ASAP so that they can get home. But Omen's not too happy about this entire situation and new development as he turns his head and begins to walk away. It's at this point that Maycone decides to interject, stating, hey, we thought you were dead. This, of course, is now starting to very obviously show that he and Elia are now in a relationship with one another. She, however, cuts him off and says, that can wait. Jill wonders what they're talking about, not realizing that Elia was the one that Omen was in love with back on Agena. He, however, interrupts her, stating, I appreciate your efforts, but this is my home now. I can't return to Agena. This seems to make Elia quite angry as she states, what could that possibly be for? Surely not her, pointing at Jill. However, Omen sits down at the table with his back to them and states that he has responsibilities here on Earth to protect the people. And, Elia states, you have a duty to the people of Agena, and, you can't dishonor the protectorate in this manner. But he states that it's because of honor that he can't return home. He then begins to tell Elia of how when he fell to Earth, he was almost completely depleted of power, and that may have been how he was able to get through the Astral Gate in the first place, because apparently the Justice Stones need recalibrated when traveling from Agena to Earth. And when he landed, he was in such dire straits that Jill Monroe had to save him, bring him, or nurse him back to health, and that he was able to discover that the Directorate was present here on Earth, and that he had to go and face them before they found him, and could potentially put Jill or anyone else on Earth in danger for that matter. However, Elia interrupts, stating, we've already been told all this by Jill Monroe. I don't see why any of that's, important to go back through. However, Omen states that Jill didn't tell them everything because he didn't tell Jill everything. This seems to make Elia a little bit happy that Jill was left in the dark on some things. Jill, of course, being a little upset that she was left in the dark on some things. And it is kind of odd to see Elia's face light up a little bit, almost as if she's, happy that the woman who, Omen effectively replaced her with is a little bit angry, even though Elia herself has moved on and is in a relationship with someone new. Omen goes on to state that he left and started flying over small towns, and that even though he knew the location they were in, he couldn't pinpoint their location because of the Justice Stone's energy signature being foreign to him. And, this is where we find out that if it's people who have a close relationship, like Omen and Elia did, they can find their Justice Stones to an absolute pinpoint and track them no matter where they go. However, if it's a Justice Stone that belongs to someone else that they're not familiar with, this is impossible. So Omen was kind of just flying around aimlessly for hours in the general vicinity of where those two Directorate soldiers were spotted, hoping that he might run into them. However, they found him before he found them, and they get the jump on him. They start to attack him, and he decides to meet them head on, hoping that this offensive will give him enough time to retreat, as he's burned a lot of energy flying around, and then these men are all fresh. However, they prove to be more than a match for him, as they have greater numbers and start teaming up to try and take him out, directing all of their energy attacks specifically at his Justice Stone, trying to destroy it and also remove all of his powers in the process. And he states that it was actually working, as we see that his Justice Stone does become damaged as it cracks and starts to leak some sort of energy out of it, and things are looking pretty rough for Omen in this battle. Omen tries to fight back as the two soldiers mock them, throwing his justice staff at one and throwing the one who had a hold of him off. However, before he can get his wits about him, they attack him from behind, striking him down through the air to the ground. Also, we see here that these baseline protectorate soldiers have, justice staffs that seem to be kind of an amber color that, again, we don't know exactly at this point what all of the different colors, staffs, and stones truly mean, but it is a different color. As Union falls to the earth, we see that he lands not far away from the father and son that we saw fishing at the beginning of issue number 1. As he collapses into the ground and tries to get back up to continue the fight or perhaps escape, he is worried about the safety of these humans and tries to tell them to get away, that they're in danger. However, it's at this point that we find out that the father is in fact part of the directorate himself, as he opens his shirt to reveal a justice stone, which is blue in color, and a justice staff, which is in blue in color. He then raises it up above his head, telling his son to get away, that this doesn't need to involve him, and strikes down, breaking Omen's justice staff in half, as we see Omen then left unconscious on the ground as everything goes dark. Later on, we see Omen get smacked across the face as he wakes up inside of the Directorate base on Earth, surrounded by the soldiers who took him in, as they begin to interrogate him, as they believe he is a spy and that he's here to infiltrate their base and figure out how he can get word back to the rest of the Protectorate forces. This, of course, is not true. Omen had no idea the Directorate was on Earth, and he also had no idea that they had a base here. However, the men interrogating him don't seem to believe his story, even though what he says makes sense in the fact that if he knew this base existed, why would he try to infiltrate it by himself? And why would he try to do so by facing them head on when he couldn't possibly match their forces? However, the interrogators don't seem to be buying it, and they state that perhaps he's just mad or he's on a suicide mission, as they continue to rough him up, punching him, knocking him out of his chair, and then kicking him while he's down. The man in charge of the interrogation continues to berate him, wanting to know how he made it through the astral gate and, why his justice stone hasn't been recalibrated for Earth. And, wants to know all the details that, frankly, Omen doesn't have the ability to give him, because he doesn't know the answers to any of those questions that are being asked him. However, the interrogator, of course, still doesn't believe Omen's story, as he tells Omen that he's going to beat the details of his mission out of him, and then he's going to kill him when he's done. Omen believes this and decides that if he's going to die fighting, as he continues to push back and try to counterattack the man beating him, as he chops him in the shoulder and then picks him up above his head to throw him. However, at this point, his body gives out, as he's just suffered too much of a beating at this point. His Justice Stone is damaged. He's been, pummeled and beaten to a pulp by multiple Protectorate soldiers. He really just can't fight on. And as he drops the man in charge, he's then assaulted by the other guards in the room, who just begin to lay into him, stomping him and kicking him on the ground. The man interrogating him then states that, he's done with this. He's tired of trying to get these answers. He's just going to kill him, when he's interrupted by someone from off the side of the page who says, "Must you be so impatient, Tyrell?" Who, this is the first time we get a chance to find out what his name is. He then turns around trying to figure out who's interrupted him, and is greeted by none other than Darian, who is the king and reigning monarch over Aegina and is the leader of the Directorate. He instantly changes his tone when he realizes who he's addressing, and we see Darian marching forward with a blue Justice Stone and Justice Staff, which I think leads to indicate that Darian was the man that was sitting on the dock fishing with his son, and was indeed the one that knocked out Omen and broke his Justice Staff. Apparently, I'm not certain about that. It's a little bit, you know, wishy-washy on the details of that. Tyrell then explains that, they've been trying to get answers out of Omen, but Omen won't, budge. He won't, give them the answers they're looking for. So Darian leans down and says, "Oh, ever the good soldier then, huh?" He's like, "Well, I'll get the answers out of you," as we see his justice staff surge with energy as it then zaps Omen. Omen states then that the pain was like nothing he had ever felt before, and that every time that he would try to crawl away, Darian would pursue him and strike him again, just inflicting incredible amounts of pain that, Omen didn't even realize could exist. And the other soldiers just looked on and laughed at him as they were just delighting in his agony. As Omen believed he was on the brink of death, he tried in desperation one last counterattack as he grabs Darian's staff as he's about to be struck with it and pulls him in close enough that he can grab his Justice Stone and rip it off of his chest. And this is the point where we find out that they're not supposed to do that. And the reason is because when a Justice Stone is suddenly ripped off of its host, it apparently goes haywire and releases all of its energy, and this will kill everyone in the vicinity. Now, Omen knew this and thought that it would result in his death, but he also wanted to take out the Directorate base in the process. However, Omen is not killed by the release of energy. As the energy release continues to grow, it starts shattering the Justice Stones of all the other Directorate soldiers that are in the room, and then also vaporizing them in the process. As the energy bubble continues to swell, it breaks through to the surface of the small town of Chichester that they were underneath. Now, Omen didn't realize that the town of Chichester was above this base. Of course, how could he? He was just awoken inside of the base. And the energy bubble continues to swell and swell until it finally just bursts and releases all of its explosive energy, completely vaporizing the town and everyone in it. We then see the massive crater that now sits where the town of Chichester once existed. This, of course, is not what he told Jill. He told Jill and also the members of Stormwatch that the Directorate used some sort of self-destruct mechanism to destroy their base in the town to make sure that they wouldn't be discovered by Earth's authorities, when in reality it was Omen that caused the destruction of the base in the town. And this is where his actions start to overwhelm him, as he starts to blame himself for all of the deaths of all of the people in Chichester, knowing that some of them were human and some of them were children. Like he says in his thoughts, the child that he saw with the man on the dock, even though that kid was a Directorate, subject, he was still a child, and he may not even have been born on Earth, or maybe he was. At any rate, he wasn't part of the war. And Omen really feels, unimaginable guilt for all of the death he caused, as he believes that, it wasn't necessary for so many innocent people to die simply so that, he could defeat the Directorate forces there on Earth. And in a complete loss of his emotions and, feeling the crushing weight of all of that guilt, he reaches out for Darian's Justice Staff and decides to plunge it into his own Justice Stone to not only destroy the stone, but to also end his own life. And we see him do this. However, I would like to point out, you can see here in this image that he's grasping the Justice Staff with his right hand to plunge it into the stone. And in the image underneath, it's clearly his left hand that's holding it from an impossible angle. That's just kind of a little weird continuity and artistic error. And when he plunges it into the stone, it doesn't have the desired effect, as somehow his stone absorbs the energy of Darian's Justice Staff and suddenly just unleashes a huge explosion that throws him clear of it as he lands in a small crater and is unconscious. He then wakes up the next morning noticing that he is still alive and his Justice Stone has now turned the same color as the Justice Stone that was on Darian's chest. As he gets his bearings, he notices Stormwatch going through the rubble looking for survivors in the town of Chichester. This, of course, is where we met up with Omen at the beginning of issue number 1. He then explains how he started to battle with the team of Stormwatch, but then later joined them in aiding them to try and help some survivors from the explosion. And that while he did lie to Battalion, he did regret it, but he needed Battalion to trust him, as he wanted him to know that, he meant no harm and that he really does want to help the people of Earth. And he's here to try and be peaceful, despite the fact that he accidentally caused thousands of people to die. It's at this point we are teleported back to the kitchen of Jill Monroe. And, Elia is also curious as to how he survived the transfer through the gate without recalibrating his stone. She then is told by Omen that when that happened, he was struck by a bolt of lightning on Aegina just before he went through the gate, and perhaps that weakened the stone enough that he was able to survive the journey through the gate. Aaliyah says that, maybe that is the case, but also states that, given that his stone was able to fuse with Darian's justice staff and perhaps take on all of the energy that was stored within that, and possibly all of the energy that was stored within Darian's Justice Stone when it exploded, that he may now in fact possess the most powerful Justice Stone ever to have existed. And, she's kind of wondering exactly what the limits of his abilities are now. However, Omen says, that's not really important. What is important is that he's now here on Earth, and, they continue their discussion. She explains to him that the reason that they're able to understand English is due to a digital mind change or memory change that happens when you pass through the gate that gives them the ability to speak and understand English and read it as well. And Omen says, that does make sense, as, at first I thought maybe humans and Aeginans just evolved on a similar path, and somehow their languages kind of meshed up. But he realized he was wrong in that when he knew and understood phrases that he shouldn't, that were here on Earth. I like that they try to explain it here, but honestly, it feels almost unnecessary and almost like something that could have been left for a later issue, or perhaps, maybe not at this point in this issue. It just seems like it's really like shoehorned in there. It's at this point that Elia states that while they do understand some parts of how the gate works, they don't understand all of it, but they do know that it was actually constructed on Earth and not Aegina. She then states that it's because of this uncertainty that they need to close the gate and keep it closed until they can fully understand how it works and how to use it, which is why the three of them need to get back to the gate and get back to Aegina quickly, because it's about to be closed. However, Omen once again states that he's not going anywhere. He plans on staying here and protecting Earth from now on, believing that he is in debt to them for the actions that he took that led to the destruction of Chichester. However, Elia decides that this isn't going to work for her and states that, he needs to come back with her immediately. And then they start to kind of argue a little bit. Omen says, it didn't take you very long to replace me with some other lapdog. But, Elia states, you're so headstrong, that's what kept you from moving up through the ranks, whereas I'm well above rank in you, or well above you in rank right now. And, we'd be equals had you just been able to keep your mouth shut and do as you were told. And then she tries to order him to come back to Aegina with her because, as she stated, she does outrank him. However, it's at this point that Omen points out, if I, in fact, do have the most powerful Justice Stone that's ever existed, how exactly do you plan on making me follow your orders? To which Elia doesn't have a response for, and she just kind of stutters. Later in the day, we see all of them standing outside the home of Jill Monroe as, we hear Elia give him one last warning that, even though Prince Darian or King Darian is now dead, his son, the prince, is still unaccounted for and most likely here on Earth. So she warns Omen to kind of watch his back and, keep his head on a swivel. He thanks her for the warning and states that, he'll be able to cross that bridge when he comes to it as he bids them adieu. And they say goodbye as well as they fly off to go back to the gate and back to their homeworld of Aegina. After the two of them are alone, Omen decides that this is the point that he needs to apologize to Jill for not having trusted her and states that he should have told her the truth from the start. And she says, you could have at least told me you had a girlfriend. To which he states, not anymore. And at this point, Jill also decides to apologize, stating that, she shouldn't have tried to keep Omen locked up in her home and away from the rest of the world and tried to dictate how he was supposed to live. And that it was really just due to her own insecurities and the fact that she really has deep feelings for him and does truly love him. But she's always had such rotten luck with men in her life that she was afraid that, once he got a taste of the outside world and what was going on and, started becoming a superhero, that he would leave and never return. And that she was sorry, she was wrong. And, if he wants to be a superhero now, she's okay with it, and states that, he should, simply for the fact that there's so many heroes who were just in it for the money, probably a reference to Youngblood and the fame, that she and the rest of the world need someone like Omen who's in it for a sense of duty and nothing else. Omen states, are you stating I should leave then? She, of course, says, no, I don't want that. And he says, good. He's like, I may have to leave at some point, but I don't want that to be now, and we'll just take this one step at a time as we reach the end of the miniseries. We then get a pinup, of course, from Matt Broom and Tom McWeeny, as was stated at the beginning, and it looks like this. Now, it is vertical, which, that always does kind of bug me. However, this is a pinup, so it doesn't bug me that much. What does bug me, however, though, is if you were going to do this style of pinup, which looks pretty fantastic, if I'm being quite honest, why would you have not made it a centerfold that could be pulled out of the comic and hung up on your wall instead of at near the end of the book where it's impossible to do that? I don't understand the logic behind that. Granted, it does mean that, whoever had this book before me, because I certainly didn't buy it new, wasn't able to do that, and I now have the book in its complete form to show to all of you on this video, but still, it seems like a real lack of foresight to put this near the end of the book where no one would be able to pull out what is essentially a mini poster and put it up if they wanted to. We then reach the letter section of the book called Communion. Most of this stuff is just people like, oh, please keep this going as an ongoing monthly series, which obviously they do. We know that now in the future. But there is one person who asks the question about the color changing Justice Stone and staff. And it's explained in this letter section that the color does actually correspond to their rank, as that's why Darian has the light blue. That's reserved apparently for the ruler of Aegina. However, there was a mistake in issue number 1 that is brought up in this response where Elia was given a light blue Justice Stone, which she was not supposed to have. There's also the fact, and this isn't brought up, that throughout the first 3 issues, Omen's Justice Stone is the correct color for the right or for where it exists in the continuity of the story in all but one page where he has a green stone where it should have been blue. Now, to me, yes, there's only one mistake, but if the color of the stone is that important to the overall story and is that major of a story point in the lore, you really should have tried your best to make sure that you had it the correct color at all times. Granted, it's something that most people would have never noticed at the time, and I even myself didn't notice it. I had to go back and look through to double check everything. And, it is just that one mistake. Also, if you watch the other 3 videos before this, which I'm hoping you did if you're now watching, the video on issue number 4, you may have noticed me really questioning the color changing and what it was about. And that's because I genuinely couldn't remember. It's been almost 20 years since I read these books, and I completely forgot about the plot point of the Justice Stone colors corresponding to the rank of the people who have them. There's 2 more pages of fan letter in the communion section, but at the very end, we get a very heartfelt and touching letter from Mike Heisler. This book was printed not long after the death of Jack Kirby, and this is just a little blurb letter that Mike Heisler decided to print, basically just paying respects to Jack and explaining how important Jack Kirby was in, getting Mike Heisler involved in comics through Jack's own work. And, really just, trying to give as much credit to Jack Kirby as he possibly could. And, more credit than he was given by Marvel, unfortunately, at that point or during the end of his life. But, it is a really cool little letter, and it is touching that Mike would take the time and the space out of his own book to try and make sure that, he was paying the proper respect to Jack Kirby that he thought Jack deserved. On the next page, we get an advertisement for the Savage Dragon versus Super Patriot coming in Savage Dragon number 9. Now, as I'm recording this video, I haven't made it that far into the Savage Dragon Savage Dragon ongoing series. However, if you'd like to know more about Savage Dragon, check out my Savage Dragon playlist. It starts with the miniseries and then goes on from there. We then get an advertisement for Stormwatch number 25, which was purposely printed 15 months ahead of schedule. This is kind of a cool, time travel plot point thing. I haven't reached this point yet in my, series about Stormwatch yet. However, I will get there. And if you'd like to know more about Stormwatch, you can check out my Stormwatch playlist. On the final page of the issue, we get an advertisement for Gen 13 number 3. I haven't made it that far in my series on Gen 13 quite yet. However, if you'd like to know more about Gen 13, you can in fact check out my Gen 13 playlist. And on the reverse inside cover, we see another advertisement for the Dakota Motor Company. This one is giving their touring date schedule. Again, I don't remember ever hearing about Dakota Motor Company at all in the early 90s. Apparently, they were a Christian rock band, which it does seem a little odd that they would be so heavily advertising in the pages of Image Comics, specifically the Wildstorm ones. But then again, maybe that's what they were going for. At any rate, if you never listened to Dakota Motor Company, I hadn't until I, looked them up on YouTube when I first saw one of their ads in the backs of one of these books making these videos. They're fine. I mean, it's nothing game-changing, which is probably why they don't still exist to this day. Or if they do, it's definitely not in this iteration. But, it was a band that existed based out of Southern California, and now they don't exist anymore. If you loved them, cool. If you didn't, cool. If you never heard of them before like me, also cool. And that was Union number 4 from the original Union miniseries. Overall, it's not a bad book. It just has a few things about it that I don't like. Number 1, they just crammed a ton of story and exposition into this. And I understand why they did it. They were trying to wrap things up, and there was a lot of story that still needed to be told, especially the whole reveal that, Omen was the one who destroyed the city of Chichester, not the Directorate. And, that's a cool plot point, and it does give a good explanation of why he decides to stay on Earth instead of returning to his homeworld. I still just think that, there were some other points where things could have been done differently. In issue number 3, the character of Nemo didn't need to be introduced at all. They could have held him off until the ongoing series. Now, I will say that when they printed issue number 3, they weren't certain that they were going to keep Union around as an ongoing series at that point. But if that's the case, why would you have ended number 3 on a cliffhanger for the Nemo character where, it was insinuated that he was going to play a role going forward when you didn't necessarily know if there was going to be a story going forward past issue number 4 of the miniseries. That seems like an odd choice. Overall, Union, it suffers from a few of the same problems that I had with the Wildcats miniseries, where, it felt like there was more story than there needed to be crammed into a smaller space than it should have been crammed into, and that there were more characters introduced than there should have been introduced. But it's not quite as egregious as what we saw with Wildcats, especially given that, Wildcats, I'm pretty sure they knew from the get-go that they were going to make that an ongoing series, so there was no reason to try and cram all that into a miniseries. Whereas Union, when they started, they weren't quite sure if it was going to be ongoing or not, so, they were trying to make everything mesh as best they could. And overall, I think they did a decent job. There's a few complaints I have, but I still really love the book. And like I said, issue number 1, one of my favorite covers of all time. Issue number 4, not one of my favorite covers of all time, but still a fantastic cover. I really like Union as a whole and think that, at the end of the day, it's a pretty decent miniseries. But then again, those are just my opinions. Your opinions might be different. You might think the entire miniseries was terrible and a complete waste of time and effort. Or maybe you think it's the greatest miniseries of all time and has no problems with it at all. Either way, it's all fine because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.